Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Mr. Cord Sachs is in the house. Cord is co-founder and CEO of both FireSeeds and WildSparq. Cord, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Glad to be on the Hustle podcast. Let's go.
Yeah, and it's not too often we get to speak to people who are also in the leadership space. So I'm excited to talk leadership and culture and learn more about you. Before we get into your story, tell us a little bit more, brief in a nutshell, about your two businesses.
Yeah, I was
what you do.
impacted greatly by individuals and leadership that really bought into culture. Dan, Kathy, I'll talk about them a little bit later in my story, but culture is a big deal to me. So when I decided I was going to sell a company and move to owning my own, I first started a recruiting company called FireSeeds. So at the end of the day, we hired we hired a culture. Our value proposition, it connects with a C-suite that values culture and knows how important it is to make sure you get a match, especially at the top. So that's FireSeeds. We're an executive recruiting firm. We do mid-executive level search. But then I also knew that a lot of the companies that we would then serve would have culture. Most of those, because they're using us, are growing. And they would need to scale that culture. So we built a company called WildSparq. It's a software platform that scales leadership development into companies that are growing, high growth, decentralized. They really want to scale people development in their organization. And we do that through our WildSparq leader development platform.
Very cool. So you've been in this space for a long time. What's the journey like getting here? Did you always know that this was the space you wanted to get into?
Yeah. I say I've backed into everything that I've ever been a part of. I think it has been around conviction and calling. And, if you look back in your life, usually you see where someone has invested in you and they've given you ideals. They've given you, at some level, a track record of success. When most mentors are there because they're telling you about how they've accomplished something great in their life. But then they're open to really showing you how to not make all the mistakes that they made. But nonetheless, and I think that's true with my story. I mean, I've seen most of what I have been able to create. It's only because someone invested in me first. And that was probably a value that I learned very early on, high school, college, even from my dad, is to always have a mentor, is to always find someone that's a little further ahead than you in whatever you're doing, whether it's a sport, whether it's, business, whether it's, hey, you're a new mom or dad, and finding someone that can help you take the journey that's already been there. And so I think, man, just along the way, I've been very fortunate to have big picture visionary leaders to give me a big vision to whatever I do. Let's shoot to have an exponential impact through it. And for me, that's always been, let me make sure whatever I build, I'm building in the ecosystem a multiplying movement of leaders who can also multiply. Because I've seen that happen in my life. Older leaders had come around me in college. I had an older leader that came around me and just helped me think about what does it look like to be a young man moving through college and then into business, and greatly shaped my life. So why don't we as business owners or leaders, we grow a department, we have teams. Why don't we think that way about how we can have an impact that's going to grow and it's going to outlive you, right? So in every component. So that's how I've stumbled into what I've done. It's all been through more of an ideal, a vision and a set of values that have been passed on to me. And it's all around multiplying leaders in my life and through my life.
One of the things you talked about with some mentorship, right? And someone investing in you and leading others. As one of the things I've seen oftentimes is no one's going to disagree with that, right? Like why, of course, investing in your people and there's always the question of how, right? But one of the biggest challenges I've seen oftentimes is when you find someone that needs that mentor, and maybe it's an internal mentor even that you're trying to kind of pair up. I think most organizations kind of skip past the teaching of the mentor.
Yeah.
And so just curious, in your experience, what have you seen to really prepare the mentor for being in that position? Because I feel like a lot of times that's missed, and that hurts the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's three major mindsets that I would say fit into this desire to want to be a part of a culture that multiplies. And I won't go into all three, but one of the three is having a successional mindset. And I mean, very early on in an organization, helping your people buy into that they need to have a successional mindset. And it's a really pragmatic conversation if you think about it. If while you are growing and producing, learning to produce, you're learning, you're executing, you're owning your job. If you can move through those first three stages and then add develop others as the next stage that you focus on, you're gonna always have an advantage on everyone else that doesn't buy into thinking about themselves as a successional leader. And you think very practically, if I am, you have to produce results, right? If I'm getting better at what I do and I'm a producer for an organization, but then all along the way, I have been investing in others to do what I have learned how to do well, then I have created myself the very thing I need to be able to be promoted into a new opportunity. It's someone that can take my place. And so, so very early on, like I mean, literally within the first week of someone coming to work for me, I cast a vision for them to be what we call a multiplying leader. But it's this idea of thinking successionally from day one. Who can you be investing in as you grow your own career? Because level one of learning anything is just doing it. Level two, if you want to go 201 on anything and become a master, what do you got to do? You got to teach someone else. If you can just start finding people to do that early on with, your advantage in your trajectory in your career will be so much greater than those who don't think that way. And that's just something I want to build into all of my leaders that work for me. If everybody thinks like that, there's a catalyst inside your organization that's a lot of iron sharpening iron and leaders building leaders that you have to build an expectation for.
But Cord, how hard is that? Because I've found, I talk a lot about this on the show, is when we talk to people, one of the first things I ask them is, what is your vision? And so many people are like, well, I want this or that, the other thing. They don't have a vision. So if you don't have a vision, you're not really looking out for yourself. If you're not looking out for yourself, how can you look out for someone else? How can you have that? I love the successional mindset. That's a phrase I've never heard before. So how do you help people get into that? Is it starting to have their own personal vision, or where does that start?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it has to hit home with them first. It's almost like if you want to tell someone about an identity, profiling tool, you could explain to them about all the steps to understand it, and you can talk about all the ins and out of it, or you could just let them take the assessment and have the aha experience of, oh, this is why I'm a DI on the disc, or this is why I'm an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs, or so I think people have to experience and have the aha that's deep inside who I am. That's what I long to do. Like that's a deep desire that I have. And so I want it to be personal first. So I want them to, so really I would want to push them, not just have a vision for their business or their team, but what's your vision for your family? Like, what's your vision for your future family? Yeah. Because I know that if they can start connecting the dots with, yeah, absolutely, I want to make sure I invest the most positive aspects about who I am into my downline that means the most to me. If I can take them there first, two things happen. One, they start to have the aha that, yeah, this does make sense. And if I could just have my kids live the best of my life, the more that can happen, the more satisfied I'm going to be in the job I've done as a father. And then you just say, okay, that's a strong, deep desire that you have. Let's get reps in how to do that at work. So a lot of all these leadership principles that you teach, that I teach, they're all principles that go what we call boardroom to family room. Like if you just think about them in a different context, every leadership principle, how to deal with conflict, being socially aware, communication, I mean, everything goes back to the most important place I could probably leverage that is with my spouse and with my kids. And when someone, when an employee or a team member, when you take them there first, it also shows, number two, that I really care about you and what matters most to you. So if you start someone there, like you're building a level of authenticity, relationship, trust with that individual, and you're really helping them align, you're aligning with them to help them hit the home runs where it matters most. Then you can say, hey, what if we take that same mindset and put it at work? You know, leaders, you have a team. What if you're helping that team grow? And part of your job is to pass on the leadership aspects that have gotten you where you are into them. And so I think you're right on. It's got to start with the why, the vision of my life, but I don't think they can connect the dots if they've never thought about that in the work domain, if they haven't thought about it in the home domain. And everybody has in the home domain. They just may not have put it into a formal manifesto on paper.
And if you haven't already written a book, I think you just got the title right there, Boardroom to Family Room.
Yeah.
If you don't write it, I will.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I actually, I'm a big, if I have an idea, I buy a domain. So I did buy boardroomtofamilyroom.com. So if you want to take it, you could have to.
No. That's you should write that book.
That's amazing.
You should write that book.
But yeah,
I love it. So going along that path, how have you, as you've been, you obviously recruit a lot of people, you kind of trying to matching people to cultures and things like that. How do you pull that out of candidates, and how do you pull that out of the company? So when I think of, a lot of different businesses that we work with, there's not many that you walk in and they say, well, our culture sucks, right? They all talk, and it doesn't mean that culture is good or bad, right? But they can be different and still not fit for a candidate.
Yep.
And then secondly, obviously in your business, you see it all the time, how do you pull the truth out of the candidates, right? Because it's really easy for them to try to position them. So I'm just curious, like, how have you tried to tackle getting that data on both sides and then marrying them up?
Yep. And this is going to sound really, really, this is going to be third level rocket science. But we'd say, and this really applies to our recruiting. It applies to our sales. And when you think about it, it makes sense. But we always start with story. We start with story. We start with story. We start with story. How many times have you been in sales and you realize you started transactionally, and it's really hard to go back in an authentic way to, now tell me your story, right? If you will simply start with story, and here's the deal. It only works if that's authentic, right? It only works if you really care about people. I mean, so if you care about people and you start with story, it is very inefficient. But you start by building trust with that individual, and you invite them to share their story. And if you'll do that in a very vulnerable way with yourself by asking, chasing questions, and then even being able to relate in places where you're more of a train wreck than they are, then you get the real person, and you get them when you're recruiting. And so it's just a very different experience for our recruiters. And we train them in this, but more than that, we just find people that first and foremost, they really care about engaging in people's lives relationally, and helping them find their wins. And so it starts with finding someone that already has that as a part of their DNA and who they are. So that's the number one thing you got to get right, is you got to get the people right in your culture. That's what I'm going to sell in the recruiting and with our recruiting firm. But then it's all about leveraging story. And then you build from story into resume and then into experience. But if you start transactionally and then you come back on the backside and, by the way, tell me about your family and spouse in the last 5 minutes. It just doesn't go over well. It doesn't, and then they have not given them who they really are in most cases. They've tried to perform for you because you've asked transactionally about the resume in their life. And this doesn't just work with recruiting, it works with every component of leadership development that you have with the people that you lead. If you lead primarily transactionally, you will only get a glimpse of who they really are, how you can really help them, where they really struggle, and then the depth and the richness of having a relationship that goes deeper as you progress in your team, in your career. And then the opposite is, if you do start with story, you gain all of those things that become your advantage. And then you end up really working with people that where you're all pulling together and having an impact in other people's lives. And man, that in a sense, that becomes a great culture.
Let's say someone's listening that say, Cord, I love this. You know, I want to lead with story. How do you go about doing that? Whether it be someone who's actively looking or not actively looking for a job, or someone who just says, yeah, I believe that. But a lot of people, if they don't have a story, they have a hard time kind of creating one. Like when I'm on a podcast, it seems to be the same thing. I've kind of got really good telling my story, but that takes time and repetition for someone who hasn't been able to do that. And I think some of the best executives I know are ones who have really amazing stories.
Yep. Well, and I think you would agree that everybody has a story.
Yes.
So it's not whether or not they just don't know how to articulate their story, to your point.
Correct.
And so, I mean, it's the very first, like when we say, hey, where do you start in our WildSparq leadership development journey? We would say you start with story. One of the first things that we're going to ask a team to do, and I'm talking about, when we go into an organization, we're putting teams together from the top all the way down. So executive team, we want you to start here as well. And I love when they actually do. It's called our leader launch pad. And the very first lesson is you're going to walk through and learn how to tell your story in a very concise way. The 5 to 7 people, places, experience in your life that has shaped you and who you are. And you've got to at least share about, or at least put 2 of the negative experiences in your life. And I say at least 2. Most people have more than that. But you've got to be willing and vulnerable to share the whole story. Integrity is the whole. It means to be whole. And when you do that, you unlock a level of trust in someone else. So we take them down a journey where they simply in about 30 minutes learn how to tell their own story. And then our leadership development strategy is all group oriented. So everybody's in a team, they're in a group. And the first conversation they have with their team is we're going to go around and share 1 to 2 parts of our story that we don't think others have heard about us yet. And I kid you not, we have executive teams that'll call me back, and they're super resistant to this, right? I mean, are you kidding me? This is so soft. Are we really going to start here? When are we going to talk about emotional intelligence? When are we going to talk about situational awareness? Whatever it may be. I said, we'll start with story. And I kid you not, they call back and it says, Cord, we have not had a more powerful meeting than we had when we simply went around and we shared 1 or 2 parts of our stories. I learned something about the other person that I've never learned. And we've been working together for 15 years. And so it really is that simple, but it's not easy, if that makes sense. So we try to build an environment to get people to start with story. And then we go story to identity. So once you've told your story, you have a little context of where you've been. Now let's talk about how you're uniquely wired up. And the great thing about identity is it's hardwired. It's neutral. It's not moral or amoral. It's neutral. It's like we all have this unique identity. And if we'll simply go around and take an assessment and then go around and share about where my strengths are in comparison with yours, there's another aha that lights up in your life with the connection you have with that team. So start with story, then identity, and then we go legacy. All right. We know where you've been. We've heard a little of your story. We know how you're wired up and a bit of who you are. Now let's talk about where you want to go. And so let's create a legacy statement. Let's create a few legacy words that you want said about you and why. And if you'll simply think through those 3 things, you've now built context as a leader to lead that individual personally, specifically, and take them on their journey that'll be very different from anybody else on your team. Great leaders learn to lead everyone else differently according to who they are. You guys know that. And so that's the very first principle we want to come alive with a leader. And the byproduct of doing all those three things first is they're building trust in their relationships like they never knew they could, and by doing three simple engagements that have to do personally with how you're gonna set out together to accomplish this work that you've been given in your job.
I want to go back and ask about identity.
Hmm.
When I hear the word identity, I associate that with, and sometimes synonymously with, the words personal brand. Now, personal brand, let's just take the marketing aspect, like the LinkedIn page, out of it. um, a lot of things that people overlook when, maybe they're becoming a leader or they are a leader and they're trying to take that next leap is, what is your personal brand internally or externally? Like, how do you show up to meetings? How do you greet people? That becomes your identity. And nobody's perfect, nor should they try to be. But at what phase do you look at that and help someone say, I need the self awareness to see or to understand that I've got a few things to work on, and I'm not going to get to legacy, the legacy that I want to leave, until I can start to make some adjustments with my identity slash personal brand. Is that at all part of your framework?
100%. And I would say it's more or less to free them up to know who I am from a preference standpoint, a temperament standpoint. I'm talking about the hardwiring that doesn't change, or at least it doesn't change that much, right? And so I think the most miserable place a person can be is establishing an identity that they want to become, and realizing that's not who they really are. And so their whole
Yeah.
life they're trying to gain energy to be something they weren't wired up to be. And for whatever reason, and I see this all the time, and that's why it's more of a freedom component. And you have to convince someone a lot of times that's gone down the track and have had a mentor to, or a figure of influence, or maybe even a father figure that was wired up a certain way. I mean, if you just take the introvert extrovert scale on any of these assessments, and you find out, wow, your dad was an extrovert and always owned the room and was the most incredible motivator and was outspoken, and then you realize, oh wow, I'm a son who's an introvert, and my strength comes from my ability to live within and to process, and when I do speak it really matters, but I'm never gonna be the one that's gonna go own and control a room. I'm never going to be one that's the life of the party, because my battery is completely drained when I do that. But when I'm someone that can contemplate and spend more of my time alone than with people, and then bring to the table what I have been able to think about and contemplate and strategically take details and facts around and bring it to bear, I am the most influential voice in the room. Now, that's just one, and you guys know, I mean, there's given, based on the assessment, and there's dozens of them under the sun. I love them. But I think that's the first step in understanding your identity, because I really do believe you were created and wired that way, for a purpose to do certain things, to where you get joy, you get energy, you get filled up and fueled by producing in that way. And we should be moving towards that seat on any given bus in an organization versus moving away from it as we grow, as we move in our career.
What I think is really critical about what you're sharing here is just starting even with the plan. You think about how many people in their life and in their career never think about what the next 3 to 5 years are really going to look like. They just take it kind of day by day. And just that, to your point, getting into your identity to then transition that into, what you want your legacy to be. I just think about, and maybe you even know this, but I got to imagine the percentage of people that get to that stage and actually write it down and then are actually planning to achieve it has got to be less than 1%. Right. And yet it's your life. Like, what if there's anything you want to like chart out and plan out? And again, it's never going to follow the plan exactly, but
Right.
I think that's so critical. And a lot of what you shared, I think what's super helpful about it is a lot of part of the reason I think people never get there is because it's so nebulous. And so having kind of this framework of step A, step B, step C, and you're to your point, you're questioning in each of these sections. it kind of makes it foolproof.
Yep. Yeah, and you got to slow down to be able to invest in raising your trajectory. I mean, if you think about trajectory, it's all about, and the earlier you do this in your career, it's the compounding effect, right? If you can raise the trajectory with knowing that your greatest drive, hustle, is going to come from aligning with these things, with the story, the identity, the legacy, the who you are, and the calling that you have in this world, the earlier you can align on that, the earlier you can then align all of the things that are going to give you life and energy to then make decisions around very practically what I'm going to do, what seat on the team I need to play, what major I'm going to major in college, and you give yourself a trajectory raise. I love hiring young leaders. Not that I won't hire older leaders or more mature leaders, but I love bringing in younger leaders because I just have, if I can raise their trajectory at 25 versus 45, where they can be in 5 years is in a completely different place than if you're further down in life. And so, yes, absolutely. But you got to stop. It takes time. Who's prioritizing this and my work to do this? I get home. I'm not going to do it there by myself. So, I mean, it really does. I mean, it's why, man, to invest in a coach, to invest into someone that can help them go there. I mean, that's what a coach does. It helps you go places you're just not going to go on your own, even though they're the most important things that will raise your long-term trajectory. And Simon Sinek proved this over and over and over again. He got his start as he, let's say, stumbled upon, but did deep study around starting with why, right? Mm-hmm. And some of us are, we're 20, 30 years into our careers and we've not stopped to get the why right and wonder why we're now at a place where there's a little regret.
Yeah. Well, this is where in many cases I'm like borderline obsessed with frameworks at the moment, right? Because like in today's world where information is flowing and there's so much complexity and there's almost overwhelmed by so many people about trying to achieve. And so to whatever it is, but to seek out expertise coaches that have a framework, that have a structure. I mean, one of the stories I share, I remember when we were building out Hustle and we were building out some of the different training videos and things like that. Some of them I was literally the one on video and I'm watching myself back. And all of a sudden I realize I'm lying to myself. I'm like, am I doing that? Am I doing that? And it's the power of the framework. It's the power of going back to it because, as humans, we continually lie to ourselves and get ourselves off path. Right. And instead getting that coach and getting that framework that then can recenter you to say, yeah, you think you're doing this, but you're really not.
Yeah. And you said it I mean, it's not about the framework. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different frameworks. Mm-hmm. Yours is, but it's about getting the coach. Now they have to have an intentional framework, but that's why a coach is a coach, is they've created that. And so as long as you're willing to, and it's an investment, but that's a way you can slow down, let someone else come into your life and that's really the only way it's going to happen. I mean, I'm a big fan of coaches. I'm in and out of coaches. I create what I call a personal board at any time in my life. I've got at least 5 people that I'm meeting with on a quarterly basis, that we take a day off every quarter to realign around our why, and we talk about our families and we talk about our, we talk about our mental health, our spiritual health. We talk about, and then we do talk about our business. Like it all works together. It is impossible to be your best in business if you're not your best in what we call body, being, and balance. Right. And so, but most employers, they're just not willing to slow down long enough. And we don't have to have people slow down for months at a time. We just need to give them a framework that's intentional, that brings them back to the why in their lives. And you guys are coaches, this. And it's just more or less helping people see the ROI of making that kind of commitment and what it can do for all of those domains. for your body being healthy physically, your being, your spiritual and emotional well-being. Your balance is all your relationships with the people that matter most to you. And then ultimately, if you get those three things on fire, you show up to work a completely different person. I mean, just raise your hand if you got in a fight with your spouse on any given day this week. Were you better at work on that day, or were you worse? And so it all matters, but most of us try to segment that out of work, and we just miss out on so much impact we can have on the people that work for us.
We had a gentleman on the podcast earlier this year by the name of Chris Williams from Group Coach Nation, and the podcast was appropriately titled "Even Coaches Need Coaches."
100%.
And I think it's something everyone needs to hear, regardless of where they're at in their career. But I want to go back to the why. I think that there are plenty of people out there that are missing the vision and potentially missing the why. And maybe you need the why to get to the vision. It seems like that might be the appropriate segment. But when you're working with people and they say, maybe I like this, maybe I want that, or maybe this is important to me, how do you help someone find their why if they don't already have that?
Well,
Or
I
can
know
articulate it. Maybe they just can't articulate it.
I mean, it goes back to everybody. If you start, what is your why in this department for this team, and how does it? I have to get them centered again. I need them to have ahas around their why for their body being in balance. Because if they can get the whys there dialed in, then they're going to quickly see how all those things will affect, and then even the frameworks you bring to body being in balance. You then we apply those same frameworks into business. But now you have a whole new level of motivation because you've seen how that framework impacted your commitment to being a steward of your body, and just being healthy and being active, being a steward of your emotional and spiritual health, and being centered and at peace in your life because of that. And then they're all the same frameworks that are looking through a different lens of what to focus on. And they're probably not there's probably not any different than your frameworks from a principle standpoint. You're gonna help them see things they couldn't see, take ownership around things they haven't taken ownership around the places in their life that are going to move the needle most. And that's always, I just know, like, I don't have to wonder, is that in body being balanced for any individual? So we have B teams in my company. Everybody's a part of a B team. And the very first event I have in the year for our company is not a operational meeting. The very first event we have in the first week of January, I take a whole day and we help them set their targets around their body being in balance for the year. And we've given them a framework to do that. And then they're put into a group all year long where they're going to have encouragement around those areas. Now, we give a lot of flexibility and freedom. There's absolutely no necessity to have to share anything they don't feel comfortable sharing. I mean, this is not your A team. So this is not an accountability group. This is simply an encouragement group. That's why it's called a B team. You should have an A team in life that get into every part of the nitty gritty and the good, the bad, and the ugly. I don't want you to have an A team here, but I do want you to have a B team. And on my dime and on my clock, I'm going to give you time to meet throughout the year and simply encourage each other around the stories that you could tell around how you're doing and your body being in balance. But we set them up with that framework at the very beginning of the year. And that little investment that I make an investment for a day that all of my employees for a whole day. And then the hour and a half breakfast that I give them once a quarter. I believe the return on that investment for my business is the greatest thing I can invest in. And then there's a whole nother day where we focus every quarter on the business framework that's identical to the body being in balance. It's just simply helping them what's working, what's not working. What story do I need to change about the way I'm doing work, the way I'm doing my job? What are the practical things? Who can I bring in? I mean, it's not rocket science. It's everything you would do in a coaching relationship. We've just tried to build that into culture and a cadence within our businesses. And we help other organizations do that as well.
That's phenomenal. I mean, it's really, it's building their business plan but building it for their life.
It's what we call boardroom to family room. It really is. It's like, if you will prioritize helping people get what they want most in their family room, I promise long-term, it will be your greatest advantage, and they will run through brick walls for you. They'll go through the tough times with you. Like, it will pay off if you just look and you monetize your retention, but not just your retention, your level of loyalty that you have that now will play out in the 80,000 hours they're going to spend with you in your work domain. So most business owners will not slow down enough to invest there, but if you will, it will be the competitive advantage that you have in your business. If you just look at your people staying with you long term and continuing to grow and desiring to want to have that kind of same impact on other people, and that's
when and it's coming through in everything you're saying. You also have genuine interest in your team.
got to. You can't.
Right? You can't fake it.
See this as a PR campaign. It doesn't work. I promise. Your people are a lot smarter and emotionally intelligent to see through that.
That's exactly right. Because I was thinking as you were talking about that, and how many people might hear that and be like, "Oh, that's the silver bullet. I just need to do these events." And it's like, those events are awesome. And to your point, the return I'm sure is significant. But if it wasn't genuine, none of it would matter.
That's right.
And you know, to your point, even the starting with story, if you start by having genuine interest, starting by, you know, really, this is my story, this is the impact I want to leave, this is, you know, I'm sure that came from your legacy, right? Like, what legacy do you want to leave?
I had someone invest in me. Multiple different individuals invest in me, sacrifice for me. One of my big questions is, who is your multiplying leader? Like, who's the person in your life that has invested in you sacrificially, time, energy, money, whatever it may be? And you know, when you look back, like, there's something that came from that. It might have been a coach, it might have been a teacher, maybe it was your dad or uncle. But all you got to do is go back and harness, you know, what kind of thoughts, feelings, emotions do you have when you think about that person? And then what if you could become that person? Because it's not rocket science. It's small commitments to then I'm going to start thinking about someone else besides myself. But it's all too overwhelming if we don't have frameworks, right? So I love them too. I mean, because we don't get much done in chaos. But when we can bring order to our life, to our business, in principles that are aligned, in cadences that hold us accountable, and then we simply have the mentor or the coach, and hopefully you're building that out as that's what your leaders are in your organization. If they're successional leaders, that's where that successional mindset comes in. Then you create your own mentors and coaches inside the organization. And then they realize, wow, this is more fulfilling than just driving bottom line. Because the greatest conversation I have with CEOs, really, if you're going to buy into our strategy, is just really understanding it's more of a legacy conversation than it is a pragmatic, operational, strategic leadership development conversation. But if you really could build a culture to where you're not only driving bottom line, and I want to say, like, if you could just buy into this being the single most greatest ROI on your long-term investment, but then you also knew you could change the lives and heritages of those that work for you. Like, that's what I believe. That's why you've been given the domain that you've been given. That's why you are the CEO. You run this team, because for whatever reason, you have been given the opportunity to steward the greatest, the place where your people spend the greatest amount of their time. The 80,000 hours they spend at work is more than any other compartment of life combined. If you think about the time they're awake at home, the time that they're at Little League, the time they're in their community, or they go to church, like, CEO, you get that. So what if you just took 1% of the time that you control and you make it about them and their personal development and their growth? I promise you the ROI will be tremendous, and you'll leave a legacy at the same time. So that's what I'm selling. I'm selling, like, you can have it all. But think of so many of those that they said, no, I'm going to just build transactionally for year after year after year after year. And they do exit, but it's always at a cost. Because I promise, if that's how they lived at work, it's probably how they lived at home too. And there's just a cost that you wake up one day. And that's why we have these midlife crises, not when we haven't made it middle of our life, but when we've sold our business for millions of dollars and we realize, wow, this is not enough to fulfill me. And then when I look back at what it costs, it puts me into a deep depression. So that's what I'm selling here.
Love it.
Doesn't have to be you. You can live for something. You can hustle and live for something that is so much bigger than you. But it starts with story. Being able to get in your own and being able to get in others. And you usually need a coach or a mentor to help you get there.
So, Cord, we talked about some really important things here in leadership and in leaders, no doubt, these qualities like story, the why, the vision, body being in balance, getting coaching or receiving coaching. Are you or is your company asking questions like this when you're searching for talent, when you're interviewing? Because historically, these are not things that are discussed in interviews.
Oh, you kidding me? It's our greatest repertoire. All we have to do is just share the story of how we invest in our people. Oh, yeah. And by the way, we're in a recruiting firm. And so if you have any recruiting experience, that might help. But it doesn't have to. Like if you've had a lot of business and B2B experience, but you really want this to be about changing the lives of those that you impact, and through the candidate that you place, or as you're selling our leadership development platform, and it's literally scaling the opportunity for business owners to put a month by month slow diet of intentional framework, leadership development framework in front of their people. And the internal managers are the ones growing and becoming the people leaders for them. Then, as I just share that story and I share what we do for our people internally, it kind of seals the deal. And I have to remind them. And then we, of course, have to vet out, can you really do the job well? But I'm a firm believer that if you have, then that should come out in your vision, mission, and values, that storyline and all those examples of how your manifesto plays out in your own organization. Someone should say, wow. And because you've heard their story and you've shared yours, they say, I want to be with those kind of people. And then, oh yeah, tell me again what the job is. It's like, I want to be doing that with those kind of that. If your manifesto, the way you share about your culture and your story should seal the deal for most people, because it's not a dime a dozen, right? Everyone else is competing at a commoditized level of, let me tell you about the money. Let me tell you about the PTO. Let me tell you about, or maybe the ping pong tables we've brought in and we've put lime green paint on the wall and we've got a keg in the corner. And man, let me tell you about that culture. That's not what people, that lasts about 3 months. That has about a 3-month shelf life. But when you invite them in, hey, we're going to grow each other. We're going to invest in each other. We have deep relationships with each other. And we're simply trying to help our clients do the same in their environments. It's a pretty compelling sell.
For sure.
I can tell. Yeah, no doubt. Cord, before we let you go, tell all of our wonderful listeners out there where they can get connected with you, where they can learn more about your businesses, and where they can acquire your services.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're in need of recruiting help, so mid to executive level leaders, and purpose and values and culture is a big deal to them, to where they absolutely have to make sure I get the right culture fit. That's what we do in a recruiting and in a lot of different verticals and industries within the recruiting world. And then number two, if they're in a place where they really, they want to scale leadership development. They realize they were that kind of leader, but now they're decentralized. Now they're 3 or 4 generations deep. I've got teams all across the country, or I've just got a company that size-wise, I can't get them all around my table. But I really want to build in a month-over-month leadership development, scalable strategy that empowers their middle managers and their leaders and their leadership team. Then that's WildSparq. So FireSeeds.com is our recruiting firm, and then WildSparq with a Q, WildSparq.com is our leadership development strategy and platform. And again, if you reach out and connect. Again, reach out to me. You can ping me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you. I'll connect you to the right guys that can tell our story. But first, they're going to ask you about yours. So just know if you reach out, we're probably going to ask you, hey, tell me more about you. Tell me your story. Love to hear about you first, and then we can talk about the problems you're trying to solve, and we'll help them do that. So FireSeeds.com and then WildSparq.com, or they can reach out to me, and I'll get them to the right people.
I love the confidence in the fact that your employees are going to deploy that framework that you've taught and implemented, and that's a tremendous sign of your leadership.
Hey,
Cord, thanks so much for being here today. We appreciate you. This was an awesome conversation. Hope to have you back someday soon. And for all the listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you, guys.